Trump has just won the general election. In this most important American general election since the new century, the Bush Group, an important force within the Republican Party, has been silent. On the 2nd of November, at the most intense moment of the campaign, Liz Cheney, the eldest daughter of the Cheney family, publicly called on former President George W. Bush to support the Democratic Party. But George W. Bush ignored her. In fact, the two families have a close relationship. During the 8 years when George W. Bush was president, Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney's father, served as vice president and was the key figure in pushing the Bush Group onto the no-conservative route. The so-called neoconservative route refers to emphasizing conservative values such as order, religion, family, and ethics domestically, as well as economic policies of low taxes and small government. Externally, it advocates large-scale military intervention and promoting American ideology to the world. Under the impetus of this route, George W. Bush launched two extremely costly foreign wars in Afghanistan and Iraq during his tenure, because the Bush Group has considerable influence in the military-industrial complex. However, in the 2016 general election, Trump defeated Jeb Bush, George W. Bush's brother, in the Republican primary. Liz Cheney, the eldest daughter of the Bush family's ally, the Cheney family not only lost her congressional seat but was also expelled from the Republican Party due to her opposition to Trump and was forced to turn to the Democratic Party. With the rise of Trump, the appeal of the Bush Group among voters is gradually declining. The political power of neoconservatism has become part of Trump. However, the deeply rooted Bush family does not intend to openly betray, like the Cheney family, and give up their foundation within the Republican Party, like other political families in the United States. This ancient family that began to emerge in the United States in the mid-19th century, under the impact of the political tide of the new era, although it has shown some shortcomings sitting idly by, is not one of them. With the double boost of the Internet technology revolution and economic globalization in 1994, the U.S. economy soared to its zenith. President Clinton of the Democratic Party became an emblem of the thriving America. Culturally speaking, Democrats and their voters took over the camp, representing internationalization, modernization, and progressivism. In this daunting scenario, Republicans rallied around Newt Gingrich, the House Whip, launching a conservative cultural war against the Democrats, advocating for Christian ethics and the concept of a small government. This war enabled the Republicans to win a resounding victory in the 1994 midterm elections, capturing both the House and the Senate, and solidified the party's base of cultural conservative voters. One notable triumph was their win in the Texas governorship. Since then, there hasn't been another Democratic governor in Texas, making it a robust Republican stronghold. Leading the charge to this victory was George W. Bush, the future president, who portrayed himself as a deeply devout Christian, sharing his daily Bible readings and his transformation inspired by God's love to quit drinking. This image of a reformed bad boy successfully won the trust of the down-to-earth people of Texas. In 1998, 4 years later, George W. Bush won re-election with 53% of the vote, becoming the first governor in Texas history to be elected consecutively during his tenure. He vigorously promoted the construction of religious organizations in communities and made the 10th of June 2000 the state's Jesus Day, urging all Texans to respond to the call of the Lord and serve those in need on that day. These actions solidified Texas with its 40 electoral votes as a Republican stronghold, giving it leverage to contend with the Democrats and making George W. Bush the most promising Joe presidential candidate at that time. Thus, in early 2000, George W. Bush reached out to the family's old pal, Dick Cheney, who had served as Secretary of Defense under his father, George H.W. Bush, and announced they joined forces in the first Prez campaign of the new century. After a fierce election, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney successfully took their seats in the White House, only to discover that even though America's got heaps of wealth and a huge territory, every piece of land with potential profit had been grabbed by deep-rooted interest groups. George W. Bush drew the support of lots of regular folks via Christian values and conservative culture. However, the Democratic Party's influence among the elite remained strong within the national capital. On Wall Street, cultural elites in Hollywood and mainstream media all favoring the Democratic Party that stood for internationalization and progressivism. The Bush Group continued to explore new areas, turning political power got from voters into gains to keep and grow their clout. It was at this time that an unexpected event gave George W. Bush a perfect excuse: the 9/11 attacks breaking out. Even during World War II, the American homeland had never suffered such a severe attack. The shocking television images totally changed Americans' idea of security, with the vast Pacific and Atlantic not enough to ensure the empire's absolute security. Since the end of the Cold War, the American military, lacking an adversary, had lost its excuse for expanding in military spending, had stagnated for 9 consecutive years. The restless Bush Group and the military easily reached a consensus on mutual interests, and the empire's propaganda machine started in full force, easily persuading Americans that troops should be sent to every nook and cranny of the world to eliminate potential threats to the empire. If there was no threat, one would be created. As long as the war machine could be set in motion, it would bring a steady stream of wealth to the military-industrial complex and the Bush Group, strengthening the tie between the two and turning into a long-term political asset for the Bush family. Thus, while the Twin Towers fell, a colossal beast rose in their place. In 2009, the George W. Bush family departed from Andrews Air Force Base to return to their hometown in Texas. That year, the U.S. military expenditure reached $661 billion, a significant increase from the $309.9 billion when George W. Bush first took office. Over 8 years, the George W. Bush administration doubled the military spending, surpassing the growth rate over a 20-year period from 1981 to 2001. The growth momentum of U.S. military spending did not cease with George W. Bush's departure due to the immense sunk costs of war. In 2023, the U.S. military spending soared to a staggering $916 billion, 3 times what it was when George W. Bush became president. More surprisingly, even without any groundbreaking technological advancements in military technology, the U.S. military received less equipment for increasingly higher budgets. For instance, in 2009, the federal government provided $16.9 billion for the construction of 9 vessels, including 1 Ford-class attack half-carrier, 1 Zbigniew-class attack submarine. In 2024, this figure rose to $32.5 billion, nearly doubling, yet the number of additional vessels remained at 9, excluding the aircraft carrier. In 2025, the budget is also planned at $32.5 billion, but only 6 new vessels are projected, excluding strategic weapons like aircraft carriers and ballistic missile submarines. The rate of increase in naval equipment prices far outpaces the rate of dollar inflation. Meanwhile, the Bush family's influence within the U.S. military and defense industry was rapidly expanding. In September 2001, the U.S. Army awarded the $660 million contract to UDI, which was part of a $12 billion Crusader development plan planned by the company for the Department of Defense. The company was controlled by a well-connected Washington investment group known as the Carlyle Group. George W. Bush's father, former President George Herbert Walker Bush, had served as an advisor to the group, marking the first time a U.S. president's father was employed by one of the largest defense contractors. George W. Bush himself had served on the board of Caterpillar, controlled by the Carlyle Group, for 5 years. 34 Lynn Cheney, the wife of George W. Bush's Vice President Dick Cheney, was a board member of the top U.S. defense contractor, Lockheed Martin Neil Bush. George W. Bush's brother was associated with a Washington, D.C. company called New British Statices, which primarily served the military contractors in Iraq. Marvin Bush, George W. Bush's youngest brother, established a new company and promptly received a $327 million contract from the U.S. Collusion Provisional Authority in Iraq. All of this is merely the tip of the iceberg in the vast and intricate network of interest between the Bush family and the U.S. military-industrial complex. However, as the Bush family's political star was on the ascent, an unexpected figure interrupted this trajectory. In 2011, New York real estate businessman Donald Trump took a shot at the Conservative Political Action Conference as his reality show was waning. At that time, Democratic President Obama's popularity was at its zenith. Trump then took aim by criticizing Obama in the media for not being American, citing his inability to produce a hospital birth certificate. At a dinner attended by many dignitaries, a self-assured Obama teased Trump, and the gears of history began to turn quietly in a direction that no one had anticipated. 8 years later, the man who was publicly ridiculed by Obama at that dinner defeated the carefully cultivated next presidential candidate of the Bush family, George W. Bush's brother Jeb Bush, in the Republican primaries. Subsequently, the Bush family's political allies, the Cheney family, were also ousted from the Republican Party in their resistance against Trump. This formidable blow pushed the once vibrant Bush family into a period of silence. In the current U.S. presidential election, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris has garnered support from one sitting president and 3 former presidents. In contrast, on the Trump side, former Republican President George W. Bush was notably absent throughout the campaign. Indeed, on the 29th of October, George W. Bush's daughter, Barbara Bush, even made an appearance at a Harris rally in Pennsylvania to support the Democratic campaign. In this monumental election, not only has the Bush family maintained silence, but many established figures within the Republican Party have chosen to stand on the sidelines, quietly seeking opportunities to reassume control of the party. The term establishment typically refers to political families with deep roots within a party, whether Republican or Democratic. Their common feature is their intricate ties with the prevailing interest groups in society. Although they may compete among themselves, they are generally inclined to uphold the existing order. To them, Trump is like a thorn in their side, and the Republican establishment is eager to rid itself of him first. Some are even willing to collaborate with the Democrats. But this move effectively severs their path back, causing them to lose their foundation within the Republican Party entirely. Those within the Republican establishment who are reluctant to take such a risk have chosen, like the Bush family, to observe from a distance. They are like vultures in the shadows, ready to swoop down the moment Trump falls. Their aim is to reclaim their territory and continue to uphold an old system with the Democratic establishment, where they appear to be in opposition but actually share the spoils. However, evidence has shown that many Americans have developed an instinctive aversion to the corrupt scent emanating from this old system. They have clung desperately to the man who promises to overthrow the status quo, the man who vows to protect them, elevating him to a hero who can save the world without stopping to consider whether this could become another tragedy, where the dragon slayer becomes the dragon. After all, the concepts of establishment and extremists are relative. For a capital system that has functioned in this country for centuries, it matters not whether the collaborators are the Bush family or the Trump family, as long as the operational model of the system remains unchanged. When extremists remain in that White House for a sufficient duration, the natural attraction between power and interest can gradually repair their relationships, and extremists can evolve into the new establishment. Trump has already demonstrated in his previous term that he has no intention of being a revolutionary. On the 6th of January 2021, when his supporters stormed the Capitol, he chose to retreat because Trump has always sought replacement rather than subversion. He has never intended to alter the entire system. His grandest vision for the country is simply to restore it to the glory of the Reagan era, as he remembers it. What propels him forward is not a sense of responsibility to the people, but his dissatisfaction with the share of interest and dignity allotted to him by the current system, which was highlighted when Obama mocked him publicly. Now, with Trump leading the Republicans to victory in 7 swing states and dominating the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court, he has proven to the system that he is a superior collaborator, worthy of a generous bid from the capitalist system to ensure the Trump family becomes a lineage of perpetual wealth and honor. No one would dare show contempt for anyone bearing the Trump name, and the once proud Bush family is left with only one option: to submit and pay homage to the new ruler. On the 6th of November, the day after Trump declared victory, George W. Bush, who had been silent for a year, finally spoke up, extending his blessings to the Trump family in his capacity as a former Republican president, and praised the high voter turnout rate for demonstrating the vitality of the United States and the robustness of its democratic system. This time, the Bush family and other established Republicans will sincerely open up to the Trump family, offering their century-old resources and connections. During this term, Trump and his children, relatives will fully experience the true flavor of the fusion of power and capital. When the Trump family becomes the new establishment, the fantasy of the rednecks, placing their hopes on a heroic figure, will ultimately be shattered. At that point, America will face true turmoil and despair.